Hello, hello. Hey, what's up?
Are you,
I'm doing great.
hi.
Whoa, hold on. Your phone
Oh,
is. Are you talking to me on a phone?
no, I'm not. I'm talking. I have like a headset thing. Does it sound bad?
It's gotten better. Okay. All right. I'm live. Don't give away any personal revealing information. Do you want to tell people who you are and what we're talking about today?
Yeah, yeah. So, my name's Sam. I'm essentially a grad student studying in Australia. I just thought, I've been in a lot of the stuff I've been doing lately. There's been a lot of stuff coming up about essentially like radicalization and the way that like different groups like especially like liberals, conservatives and stuff like kind of like interact with one another
Hmm.
and it kind of yeah, and there's just some really interesting stuff that's been coming out in the literature and I thought you guys would find it interesting. I've been watching you for a bit and I see like you talking to like other people and liking like stuff from literature, so I thought might be interesting.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Are you? What is your major? Or I guess like what are you
So I
studying in?
do
Yeah.
I'm studying psychology. I'm hoping to go into doing social science,
Gotcha.
like so social psychology, hopefully political psychology. Yeah.
Okay, cool. If you're a master's student in Australia, does that mean that your undergrad is done?
Yeah, so the way what I'm actually doing at the moment is I had a undergrad in another degree
Mm-hmm.
and they let you do as a graduate student essentially like a condensed version that
Gotcha.
lets you go into masters. So I'm in the middle of doing that now. So
Okay,
like
cool.
no means an expert, you know, like there are people who know this stuff like fronts and back way better than me, but I thought like I hadn't seen anyone talking about it like in this kind of area. So I thought, yeah, it might be cool.
Okay, yeah. Well, hit us up. What's the first topic you'd like to visit?
Yeah, no, easy. So there's this like really cool idea that's been coming out of the literature of like essentially like contact. So essentially like they used to think that people who were like really politically conservative were the only people that had like any form of like really real like prejudice. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was like they used to call it like a prejudice gap between like right wing and left wing people. Pretty much all this study comes from like USA samples,
Mm-hmm.
so they just use that kind of left wing right wing dichotomy. But recent like studies have shown that like there's actually this idea of like a conflict hypothesis where like people are like ideologically people have in their ideological base, they like kind of, when they come across people that conflict with their moral values, it kind of causes them to attribute all these negative, um, like negative traits towards them. Even more so, like there's this other idea called like the morality mandate hypothesis, which is this really cool thing where people like if you have a really strong moral conviction
Mm-hmm.
and and you come across someone who doesn't have a strong moral conviction, right, but your like baseline moral position is like conflicting. Let's say like yeah, again, classical, like someone who I don't know, believes, yeah, it's mainly like morally based stuff, like so like someone who's like, let's say, like very much for like queer rights or something, and someone else who might think that that's not really like something that important, or like being against it on religious grounds. What actually happens is people will distance themselves socially and physically
Mm-hmm.
from one another, which is really cool. It's
Gotcha.
like a really cool idea. And like this kind of internal bias has even been shown to happen like when attributing like things towards like political figures. Like there was this really interesting study where they essentially showed that like when it came to like judging statements by political candidates, if um, if one person, like if the candidate was like seen to be from a certain political party that was more progressive or more conservative,
Mm-hmm.
right? They would make different attributions, even though it was the same statement and they'd experienced that statement before. So it's like an in like a within subject design. So people were like essentially like going through this study and being presented with statements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would change their political view depending on, they would change their view of the statement depending on who was saying it,
Yeah,
even
makes
though they
sense.
knew that they were doing that. It's really interesting. Yeah. So
Hmm.
my main kind of thing I wanted to talk about when it came to what you're doing and what's like happening in the kind of like debate area was this like theory called like contact theory,
Hmm.
where it's like really simple, but and it's really backed up by a bunch of science that essentially says that, you know, people who have like really strong prejudices, their prejudice levels can be dropped like dramatically by just having like a positive contact with someone of the prejudice group,
Hmm.
right? Even like other stuff like people that works if like someone has a friend who's had positive contact with someone in a prejudice group,
Hmm.
which is like really cool because it can, yeah, it just shows this like kind of idea of like social cognition and the way that these like things can be broken down. But what I think is really interesting is that like it has to be like a positive contact.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so yeah, so what I think like I don't know, what I see online is when you see a lot of like people from different ideologies talk, it's kind of like they're going in and like kind of hitting each other like
Hmm.
with an ideological hammer kind of. And I think that like that just creates more of that like ideological conflict and like kind of pushes people to the sides. And that's what like the literature is kind of showing. Of course, it's not like an online stuff, it's just like general community kind of samples, but
Hmm.
I think it's like pretty applicable. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like it tracks with everything that we know, like so far about any of this. When you talk about exposure to a group that you have a negative opinion of, changing radically your view of that group, it reminds me of the story of have you heard of Daryl Davis, the black guy that talked to the KKK people to get them to leave?
Yeah, I have heard of that.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got stuff like that, and then generally, if you have negative views of a certain group and you go online, you usually find the most extreme people of those views, and the most extreme people in any group are probably going to reinforce whatever preconceived negative views you have of those people. So it kind of works to just like reinforce all the horrible things that you thought about a given person. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. Like I think that like I remember I was listening to something ages ago about someone even like Stefan Molyneux,
Mm-hmm.
who would like they would get their viewers to like they would get their like followers or whatever to like dissociate like kind of
Leave their
distance
family.
themselves,
Yeah.
yeah, leave their families, get rid of all of that. So yeah, it's pretty interesting that these like cognitive effects of and these like social effects of like political worldview and stuff and like moral values have like such a drastic kind of impact on the way that people yeah, and what people do in their social lives and the ways that people live their lives.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought there was this other interesting idea that that's come out that essentially like people like these prejudice groups like maybe in the realm of like different like subcategories of like prejudice. So like dangerous, like dissonant, and denigrated are usually the main ones. So I think there's this idea that you see like especially like on the left wing where people where people essentially have go from this kind of dissonant kind of idea. So they'll see someone that maybe is a conservative, right? And it'll go from being something that's politically dissonant to them. But through this whole rhetoric and through like, I don't know, like posturing and stuff, like that may move into a dangerous camp where those like classical ideas of contact theory like haven't really been shown to work when someone views the other person as dangerous. Like there's this really interesting study that looked at this phenomenon with like different when it came to um target groups that were either like, you know, someone was schizophrenic or like someone was a or someone was like gay, or I think the last group was like an indigenous group. And yeah, it was really interesting to see how like if they had a different, especially dangerous like categorization of that person, they would their prejudice levels wouldn't drop, right? Because they physically wouldn't be less like like aroused, like they would still have the same degree of like nervousness and
Mm-hmm.
stuff around them, which I think is really interesting, because I think with this kind of like whole kind of rhetoric, you can actually you might be able to move people from like a kind of dissonant group into a dangerous one, and then just any contact just doesn't work, which is kind of interesting. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that seems to make sense. It kind of reminds me of how you're supposed to do like exposures if you have somebody that has like a traumatic association with something, or if they have like bad feelings. Basically, a lot of people think that exposure therapy is just exposing somebody over and over again to the negative stimulus until they get over it. But the reality is that what you actually need is limited exposure that is positive. But if you don't have that positive exposure and you just keep doing it over and over again, you'll build the negative like reinforcement. So or you'll negatively reinforce, I guess, the fear or trauma. So if you're having exposures to people that are in that contact group that are incredibly negative, or the word you used wasn't not dissonant, but
Dangerous.
dangerous, yeah, I guess. And then if all of those interactions online just continue to be negative or whatever, then I guess the feelings
Well,
that they're
yeah.
going to have are going to. But then I guess you were saying that even if they're not negative, I guess people are still having like negative experiences with them because they've been pushed so far over.
Well, yeah. Like the negative kind of attribution is like the baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you so like there's yeah, interesting studies that essentially like people will just attribute negative traits
Mm-hmm.
to a person if they're told that they're of like a certain ideology,
Sure.
right? So I without that, like you have to physically break that down. And you're completely right about the idea of like contact therapy when it comes to like people who have like PTSD or like a certain phobia or something. It's a pretty much a similar process, because it's been shown like in people, especially people who are conservative, not so much
Mm-hmm.
in left wing, because this is like kind of emerging area,
Yeah.
that they actually have like there's an association with having like a larger amygdala, and that part of the brain is the part that triggers with fear,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's always going off. So you're doing a similar process of having to expose the person to something so that they go back to a homeostatic like level, like
Mm-hmm.
base around that, and that's what trains the association. There's also like really interesting stuff when it comes to exposure therapy of this idea called uh, got spontaneous I think it's like spontaneous regression, I think it's called. Yeah, where essentially people like who have been, let's say you have a phobia of elevators, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can never go into an elevator. They go, they have therapy, they do CBT, and then like they're fine, and then 12 years later they'll just be having a day where they're like having a really bad day, and it'll just trigger again
Mm-hmm.
out of nowhere, which I think is really interesting, because it certain ideas like that could I don't know, I guess like permeate through like different like political beliefs and stuff. Like I have friends who have parents who are from like Poland and stuff, and there's a very much that like, I mean, understandably, that like that visceral reaction to anything that's associated with like like the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so like you can see how like that essentially like this stuff can like kind of like this like prejudice can like come up over again, because it looks like that the reason like in a lot of conservative people that this is happening is like some sort of like fear, some sort of like aroused negative state that they're like kind of like that is causing them to be like really kind of, I don't know, I guess like clashing with people
Mm-hmm.
that they experience that around. Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was, yeah, it's pretty interesting. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean everything makes sense to me. It seems to track with everything that I know. The most obvious example of what I can think of in terms of what you're
Yeah,
telling me
easy.
is well, for me, I was going to say personally, I've had a big issue came up recently over some political stuff where I've been in huge disagreements with a lot of people on the left, and I've had some of the exact same conversations with some conservative figures who are on the right now, that have seen the disagreements I've had on the left, and they think they can like turn me conservative. But now when I talk to them and I talk about the exact same ideas that I had before, they treat me with a lot more reverence or more consideration, because now they've identified me as belonging to a group that's not as threatening. Whereas before I was like a lefty or a communist. Every single thing I said was horrible and evil and tainted. Now I'm more reasonable. I'm a centrist and whatever. But anything I say, even if it's the exact same thing I said before, they'll treat like far more reasonably, and they'll give like a lot more consideration in their thoughts before dismissing it or arguing against it, which I thought is really funny.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I mean, like, yeah, everything like the kind of data that the studies I brought up before, like, kind of like track with that, that it has more to do with like the way that people yeah, the way that people view you more than it has to do with like what you're actually saying in a lot of instances.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that, yeah, I think that like once people go get kind of like polarized into these I think it's like almost like a shorthand, right? So like if you have like I like cognitively idea like this is my set of beliefs, this is like the in group I belong to, right?
Mm-hmm.
um then as soon as like you hear anything that clashes with that, you actually have to get over that kind of like cognitive hump of being like, this is someone of like my opposing group that actually has some like interesting opinions. And I think that also with talking about that negative attribution, you kind of like assume the worst of what someone's saying. So like what I've seen with a lot of your stuff is that like, you know, people will assume that you're saying something kind of like you're not,
Yeah.
like, you know, like they'll assume the absolute worst.
Mm-hmm.
And that might have to do with it being like a like that negative attribution that's coming from that opposing ideological framework, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
People,
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. When I talk to people, I can tell. I just had a conversation yesterday with a guy that sounded he was reasonable, and we were having like a good conversation. Like nothing, he wasn't. No one said anything mean or anything. But when I gave like a suggestion for like this is a possible gun reform, like his response is, "Well, I don't like that gun reform because of X, Y, and Z policies." And these were things that I absolutely didn't support. But because he viewed me as being like more left leaning, he instantly attributed these positions to me, which was kind of frustrating. And then I've also said in the past that like I don't feel like I don't like a lot of the political labels used online now, because I feel like as soon as I give a political label, I have to spend more time explaining why I'm not that label than why I am, and people just use them to make broad assumptions about people. And
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it like can come down to like the fact that like when people are online, right? Like you can find like an in group of people that believe the same like really niche thing that
mm-hmm.
you do, you know. So yeah, and it gets to a point where like I know especially like, you know, at university there's a lot of like very left-wing people, and yeah, you'll see them have you'll see that kind of social distancing happen when someone will be like, oh, I'm a like, I don't know, like a market socialist or something. It's like, oh no, so we're like I'm like I don't know, a communist that believes in like a centrally planned market economy or some shit like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it'll be like you guys are like your points, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with them, but they're like very similar. But you're having this big kind of pushing away, you're an idiot, you don't understand, just because of like the that kind of the effect of those like two are like opposing groups when people like choose to kind of separate themselves out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Sorry, I don't have much experience like publicly speaking about this stuff, so I'm sorry if it's a little
No, yeah, you're fine.
interesting to listen to. Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well. Like, there's this other idea called like, have you heard of what is it called, behavioral immunity before?
No.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. Like, they're essentially like people use social cognition to like distance themselves from possible like viral threats, right? So like, you know, like you see this very commonly like when you're walking down the street, like someone that sees someone that is like homeless, let's say. I've especially seen it around like COVID, and they'll physically like kind of distance themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that also happens with like social stigmatization, right? Like so like you'll stigmatize a group to define them as an out group, right? So that you can like protect yourself from a possible threat of getting like infected with some disease, right? And but what's really interesting is like there are a bunch of studies back in 2014 that have essentially shown that people who have like a disgust, right, like a really strong like disgust response to a certain stimuli, right, have like respond as being like more politically like conservative,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like the target group they used was like was homosexual people,
Mm-hmm.
and they essentially like showed them that like when they were exposed to a like foul smell, like their levels of like disagreement with them, and like not wanting to like be around them, just oh sorry, their levels of agreement with gay marriage, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
just like plummeted
Yeah.
like through the floor. Yeah, which is really interesting. So I think that I don't know, it hasn't really been shown out with more kind of like I guess like less salient threats, but I think like something like COVID, with the idea of like there's this like ever looming virus
Mm-hmm.
that can infect people, might have this kind of like symbiotic relationship with the amount of like I don't know, like political um fracture fracturing like that you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um. Well, is there anything else you wanted to go over or talk about or anything? I don't think I disagree with anything you're saying. Like, I think yeah, we see a lot of these like things play out in real time. So yeah, I don't think I disagree with anything. Yeah.
Okay, easy. Well, I mean, no, that's I guess I don't really have a disagreement with anything that you're saying. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, there's nothing no point of like contention I want to talk about. Um, yeah, no, I just thought that'd be yeah, interesting thing. But no, that's yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks.
Gotcha. Do you think for somebody in my position or for somebody online that's engaged in politics, do you think there's like one or two helpful nuggets of information that they could take from this information to like change their behaviors to be more politically or conversationally effective? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that one aspect of it has to be like again that positive contact, because like from the stuff like it just having contact with someone like by itself won't have that effect. So I would probably say for someone in your position that the important thing is to kind of like I guess like develop like a like some sort of like personal connection with the other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can see the other, if the other person can see you as not, I don't know, more as an individual, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and less of like a member of a certain group, right? That your ability to bring them over and like convince them of your kind of point of view is going to be like a lot more effective. Um, and I mean, like what would be the second thing that I would say? Mm,
I think in terms of that first thing that you said, this is
mm,
loosely related, but it's kind of funny that when it comes to online gaming, it seems to be, this is just anecdotal, but it seems to me that it's harder to flame people incredibly hardly, like to go like really hard and say really mean things to people when they're talking to you in voice rather than when you're all just using text. That's something that I've noticed in online games that I've played. That in text, people can be really, 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 really mean, but in voice, it's a lot harder to be that mean. Sometimes people are, but it's not as common.
well, yeah, I guess it's like distancing to a certain extent. Like,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever heard of like I think it's like the Milgram experiments, like back in the day?
Mm-hmm.
Of that one more had to do with like social authority.
Yeah.
But I think that like the actual like physical level of interaction that you have with someone like probably mediates empathy,
Yeah, it's
right?
probably
So
important that
like
the other person was locked on the other side and you could never see them. You only had the audio recording. Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. I think you probably find, I mean, I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but I think you probably find that, that level of, I don't know, raging out at someone is probably going to be less if you're on like video chat as
Mm-hmm.
well, because it's just that next level of like interaction again. Um, but yeah, I think like with the internet as well, like people just like it's so hard for people to like see other people as like human beings. It kind of just like yeah, I guess like you see them as more of like a member of some like kind of alien group to you,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. Yeah, I would I'd probably say that the second thing is like I think that something like the moral mandate hypothesis has kind of, I guess, like implications on the way, like the kind of presentation of rhetoric, in the sense that like I think that if you start with something that is very like um confrontational to people's like beliefs, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to trying to find a
Common ground.
like yeah, common ground. Yeah,
Hmm.
you run the risk of immediately just pushing the person away
Yeah.
and making them want a social distance. Because I think what's probably happening is people kind of, I mean, I guess it's hard because like most people would know who you are and know where you stand on things before coming into a debate.
Hmm.
But like I think that with yeah, it's the I think that yeah, if you can establish that like kind of common ground and yeah, no, it's sorry.
No, I understand what you're
um
saying. This is a thing I
yeah,
use in debates sometimes where I'll try to start with as many descriptive facts that we agree with as possible before moving on to like prescriptive statements. So if somebody is a white nationalist, like I'll try to start with acknowledging that, like, yeah, like some people can feel disaffected. Yeah, it feels like there's like less representation in media, blah, blah, blah. I try to start with establishing some common descriptive ground before saying that, like, okay, but what's like a better solution for our problems than killing all black people? Like maybe it would make more sense to do this or this or that, and that usually starting from like a like common ground can usually move you towards a more productive conversation than immediately launching off into why you disagree with their prescriptive statements, basically.
yeah, 110%. And I think there's even like I guess like an emotional aspect of that
Hmm.
that's probably more salient because like I think that like there's this really, can't remember his name. There's this like essentially a linguist philosopher who language philosopher that said that like a large part of like any conversation is like the aesthetics of like how it's presented, you
Hmm.
know. So I think that there's an aspect of like having you have to like form a kind of like space where like you can I guess have a like have like yeah, that emotional connection with someone, so like you lay out this kind of like common ground that you believe in,
Hmm.
right? But then you have to almost like humanize yourself to the other person to get them to like actually listen to what you're saying.
Yeah.
um yeah, because the kind of that kind of priming of this person's from another social group can kind of just get them to I don't know, immediately attribute things that you're not saying or not really listen to what you're trying to express.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Yeah, okay.
cool.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, hey, if you ever hear anything that I'd say that you want to comment on, or if you think that there's like a relevant thing you can poke in on, or if I say anything you disagree with or you think I'm missing, yeah, you can always feel free to just shoot me a message or we can chat about it or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Like if there's anything you want to know, like in my degree I've done like a lot of like different areas of like psychology. So like if there's anything that you want, yeah, I can if you bring up any psychology stuff or whatever, just
Hmm.
let me know. I'm not the best public speaker, but I can send you papers. That's yeah, and that'll work too. Okay,
Yeah, for
cool.
sure.
Thanks.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Bye. Fucking competitive game that's ever been released on Twitch. Like, holy shit. Like, you're literally, your avatar is a fucking Teletubby, and you're getting this mad.